So I'm going to characterize the storm a little bit, talk about its effects, talk about how the RCD and various partners are responding, offer a few insights that come from RCD staff, and then spend a little bit of time talking about longer solutions to resilience. Characterizing the storm, staff is currently estimating that we're right now estimating this is about a 50-year rain event. I don't know that anybody's really landed on this. The storm had different effects in different places, and also no one storm was necessarily a 50-year event, but there was an accumulation of them. It was a sort of a storm complex, and that it wasn't just about a lot of water coming in, but there were some very strong winds, and the prevailing winds were almost Category 1 level. And again, the winds varied a lot throughout the district with different microclimates and topography and windbreaks, et cetera. And also these storms happened when the system was already extremely stressed by drought and fire. And so we have a lot of questions about the significance of having more dead or downed wood, about whether these stressed trees were more susceptible to falling or breaking, whether the eucalyptus in some places that burned in 2020 had a regrowth that was very top heavy, whether the bare soils from the fires mobilized. So these are some of the things that may have been compounding in this storm. These are, we did some drone aerial imagery on January 9th and January 12th. And these are some of the images from January 9th of the entry to the community of Pescadero. So the what you see on the left is the Pescadero Creek Road going across going across Butano Creek into town. And what you see on the right is that same road going into town. The flooding that you see on the right of that photo is largely from Butano Creek, and the flooding that you see on the left is largely from Pescadero Creek that comes through town around here, through Pescadero and Bradley Creek, which is a tributary to Pescadero. One of the things that we've been doing is asking a lot of people to share with us photos and videos they took from their yards during the storm. And we've been collecting quite a library of observations that at some point we'd like to put together and correlate with what stream gauges were saying the creek was, and what the conditions were. So what you see here back there is what is usually Pescadero Creek, which would have been 15 feet down in the channel, and then a couple dozen feet out. But you'll see instead that the river, or that the creek became basically a river, went up beyond the banks and across backyards. And you'll see it goes right up to the homes. There was one home in this area where someone said that they had several feet of water in their kitchen. And so the creek was doing what creeks do when they're filled with water like this, which is typically move and also move sediment. So let me stop that share. These are some of the effects that we observed. There's a lot that has to do with falling or hazardous trees that have caused damage to homes, water tanks, or for drinking water supply or agriculture, roads with impacts to access, egress, emergency response, falling trees that exacerbate some of the log jams, and when they fall, maybe take out big holes on stream banks and can cause loss of property. There's one dam that we know of that is failing, and in order to keep the housing below safe, they needed to drain the dam, which means that they won't have water for the farm later. And there's very limited resources to address this kind of failure. There tends to be resources more for emergency response, maybe like putting sandbags, for example, around the houses below, or K-rails, but less for being able to do those repairs. A lot of sediment movement. What you're looking at in this image is an example of, in an area that had burned, there was a lot of sediment coming down. The sediment filled the culvert that was under this road that went back to this housing. There's farm labor housing, et cetera, back in this area. when the sediment filled the culvert, the creek had to find a place to go, and it took out the road that is the access to the homes back here. You can also see a little, like the sort of mudslide. There's a couple feet of sediment that went pretty much to the base of the house. Fortunately, not much worse than that. So we're seeing mudslides, culverts being plugged up, flooding, roads being washed out, impediments to access and egress, as I mentioned. We're also seeing erosion that is causing loss of property. From stream banks, we're seeing new gullies forming. Gullies are basically these fissures that form in soil, often on hillsides, that can basically unravel a hill and contribute sediment below, which is a concern for water quality and habitat, as well as for people to lose that property. And also often these healthy soils would otherwise be holding carbon, which is something that we really value. And so the erosion causes downstream flooding, can also expose septic systems and all sorts of impacts. One of the big issues that we're seeing is log jams, pretty significant, essentially dams, either floating mats or dams that can cause a lot of damage to property. And as many of you know, at the RCD, we spend a lot of time putting wood in creeks, and wood in creeks it's sort of the natural way that creeks manage themselves, to personify that a little bit too much. But wood in creeks can have a lot of benefits for armoring banks, for holding back wood that can be destructive, for sorting sediment and holding sediment back. There's a number of things that can be very beneficial about having wood in creeks. And then there are times that, since we have built our communities, our businesses, our roads, our infrastructure in floodplains, there are times now that when wood is coming through these constrained creeks, it can be very destructive. In an unconstrained natural system, first of all, there will probably be less wood coming down than what we're seeing. I'll explain that in a little bit. But second of all, creeks would move. They would move around and onto their floodplain. But our floodplains in this area are largely developed, and so therefore constrained. So while it's true that we spend a lot of time putting wood in creeks for all the benefits that they provide, during these circumstances when they're really detrimental and high risk, that's a time that we might be interested in taking some of the wood out. Also, what's interesting that we've observed, and I think that there's going to be a lot of conversation to have with communities afterwards, is that we observe that if a tree is across a creek and water is passing through the branches, it doesn't pose a threat. But when all of those holes in the strainer fill up, it forms a dam, and that can be really destructive. And one of the things that we're seeing is that maybe 80 to 90% of the wood that is filling up those strainers and causing the problem is actually cut wood. So it's quite likely that things that people are doing upstream to protect their properties because they're concerned about wood is contributing to or exacerbating the problems downstream with the log jams. And the whole issue about how wood can be beneficial, how it can be detrimental, how to manage it in streams is a conversation that I think we're going to need to have into the foreseeable future. As we did with the fires in 2020, all staff just pivoted to being able to bring our resources and expertise to serving the community with this particular natural resource related need. We created a tracking sheet that indicates we've been in contact with maybe 50 to 60 landowners and have had dozens of site visits to gather information and provide technical assistance. And the main areas of service that we're providing is on-site technical assistance on individual properties, collecting data about impacts to agriculture, specifically farm impacts, and seeking sources for relief from USDA Farm Service Agency Emergency Conservation Program. We're submitting this list to the county that is trying to be able to potentially access other emergency response or recovery funds, etc. And also, we've been coordinating efforts to try to mitigate hazard trees and remove fallen trees. Team Rubicon is a nationwide volunteer organization of people who are certified sawyers, et cetera, who can go out and help after a natural disaster. And they've got a team that is in San Mateo County right now. And our Forest Health and Fire Resilience team has been coordinating with them to try to get them out to some of the properties that we've assessed and seen has extensive hazard trees. We also have a grant from the Coastal Conservancy that we already had that would enable us to manage some of these trees, and we might be able to provide some benefit to those property owners under that grant. And then a lot of our work, I'd say that the majority of our work has been addressing log jams in Pescadero. So I'm going to spend some more time talking about that in a bit. But before that, I wanted to talk about some of the partners that we've been working with. Specifically San Mateo County. I just want to give a very big shout out to San Mateo. So San Mateo County, of course, has a Department of Emergency Management they've got their incident command. And so they do all of the countywide coordination on preparedness, response, and protection services, coordinating agencies that respond, mobilizing resources, et cetera. The Department of Public Works has been dealing with their road closures, repairing roads. They also removed a log jam that was in their right of way and immediately upstream of their bridge in Pescadero. The county has been extremely nimble and proactive working with the RCD and enabling us to respond to community concerns. They created, in very short order, they created an agreement that provided $200,000 for the RCD to be able to address these log jams. And also we've had a lot of support from our new county supervisor, Ray Mueller. We've been also working with the Natural Resources Conservation Service of the USDA. Our partner, Jim Howard and Dylan Beatty, are here today. And we've been coordinating with them about site visits and technical assistance and collaborating in a unified response with various partners, and also working with them to assess USDA financial assistance opportunities. And then, as I mentioned before, this Team Rubicon. And then also I consider as partners the many, many landowners who provided access for us in short order, let us bring equipment across private properties, heavy equipment across private properties, who just kind of leaned in and trusted us and were willing to work as a community to give up a little bit to help people downstream. And, you know, a creek is really connecting them. There are a lot of people who've worked together as a community. I've also seen for a number of the washed out roads and other things that there's various GoFundMe and other community fundraising efforts going on. So now about the logjam mitigation, I just want to spend a little bit of time explaining that work specifically. It's so complex. My head has been hurting for weeks. Thank you for our director, Steve Steelstra, who came out on site, and I think Steve got a sense of the complexity of that, and that was on a slow day. This has got a lot of elements to it. One is that as you're developing your approach or how you want to deal with the log jams, even as you're developing your approach, log jams are constantly changing in their size, in their shape, in their structure, in their location, in their impact. When I talk about their impact, sometimes they can there's elements of them that can be beneficial. Sometimes they might not be a very significant problem, or this is a good place to have a log jam. And there's other places that they can be very destructive. The site conditions for accessing and mitigating the log jams can change as the wood moves through the system. And that can happen from changes in the storm or changes in creek conditions, or as trees continue to fall. We might develop an approach to a log jam and then a tree falls immediately downstream of it, which would form a new log jam, and it changes our approach. Or we might be working on a log jam and then a landowner upstream starts cutting up wood and sending it downstream, and that changes the approach. This is extremely dynamic. So that means that it might change where you need access, the location that you need. It might change the types of equipment or crews that you need for the work. And it might increase, reduce, or not change the type or level of risk, or it might change what is being threatened. Is it this side of the bank and it's this property, or is it a farm field, or is it a natural resource, or, what is it? And the other thing that is an important variable in this is that it's not like log jams always form in a place that they're readily accessible through public land. Private landowners have preferences or requirements regarding who they will let on their property, which contractors they'll on their property, what type of equipment, or which place it's okay. Some places on their property are precious to them and others are okay for us to maybe use for access. Some might have their own philosophical approach to managing log jams or managing wood and creeks that may or may not be consistent with the work that we're proposing to do. This is an example of a location where that we would prioritize, for example, managing a log jam. So Pescadero Creek makes a sharp bend, like a 90-degree bend. And there were the conditions that were forming right here for a log jam behind the church. I see that Wendy is here on the call, and thank you, Wendy. So this is someone, she was a representative for the church who had been evacuated for her home, didn't have access to a computer. We're calling her, at night, and she's executing a landowner access agreement from her phone while she's displaced so that we can get in there and do work. So these are the kinds of circumstances we're talking about. And then that log jam and log jams in this area can jeopardize a significant chunk of the town. Some of our insights, some of our lessons learned, are things that we're thinking about in addressing the log jams and some of the other issues going on. One maybe silver lining to come out of this is that the flooding that we saw in Pescadero very much affirmed the models that we developed. We've been working on integrated, holistic solutions to managing a long reach of Pescadero Creek, lower Pescadero Creek, for habitat for endangered coho salmon and threatened steelhead trout, as well as protecting people's properties, as well as attenuating flooding, and finding ways to manage a creek for all the benefits that a creek can have. And the modeling that we had done for that project was largely affirmed with what we saw in these storm events. Also, this provided an opportunity to test projects that we've implemented. So the dredge project, the Butno Channel Reconnection project, I'm pleased to report did what it was designed to do. It functioned very well. It was kind of surprising how late Pescadero Creek Road flooded, given that that's what used to flood all the time. That project was to reduce the extent, frequency, and duration of flooding on the road and adjacent properties, and it did do that successfully. And also some of our floodplain restoration projects, we don't have measurements or monitoring of that. It's largely anecdotal. Another thing is that there are places where that creeks kind of need a big storm to scour them out, to help the creeks be able to carry water. I mean, that's some of what we saw in San Pedro Creek in Pacifica, where there were concerns about the mouth of the creek becoming overly vegetated and having other things that might be barriers for fish migration. Scour probably helped with Butno Creek and to help maintain the dredge. And fortunately, the county and state parks had gotten out into Butno Creek and done some vegetation management in the dredge area before this storm that I think was really helpful. Another silver lining is that this is catalyzing a lot of conversations about watershed health with new partners or renewed partners. Some of the things that many of you who are involved with the RCD have heard us talking about for years and years and years about the importance of watershed health and how watershed health and function is not just for wildlife, it's also for people and communities, and all of the benefits that come from healthy soils, healthy creeks, and proper management of forests. And the integration of these things is finally hitting the mainstream. It was in the New York Times, it was on KQED. I'm hearing elected officials talking about this. And so I feel like ears are really open to the kind of work that we do, and that's exciting. Also, we have a lot of lessons learned about the fish monitoring. So we have these basically antenna arrays for monitoring fish that are migrating in the watersheds. And we had some lessons learned about that equipment and how our partnerships work to do that. I see that there's a word missing on the next button, or bullet. I think another thing that is I think that we got a lot of credibility because this storm validated a lot of what we said would happen in certain places. And that's important for us as staff in knowing how to approach natural resource management. And I think that now when we talk with partners, community members, et cetera, this is going to validate some of that. I think another silver lining to this is I think that this enhanced community confidence, I think that when we talk about why and when and how we want to put wood in creeks, I believe that people are going to have more trust that we're holding the whole picture when we're also demonstrating an understanding of when and where and how it is destructive, and a number of other ways that I think this builds trust with landowners and partners about our work. And then we have a lot of potential observations, or well, we have observations. We don't have conclusive answers yet. That's going to be coming in more, but we are definitely seeing some benefits of a number of the restoration projects that we've done in helping to mitigate storm impacts. There's a lot of cases where large wood in creeks did a good job of holding wood back from going down to places where it'd be more destructive. There are places where people have done a lot of work to build soil health that draws down greenhouse gases and stores them, carbon sequestration, and stores them in healthy soils, and where people have done regenerative land management at scale. You see that these properties withstood the storm better. Where there are healthy soils that are like a sponge, they're not getting the gullying, they're not losing their soil, they're not contributing to problems in the creeks as much. They're also going to be properties that are holding that water longer. They're keeping it on their ranch or whatever, and it's going to be beneficial for them, and it can help with the base flow of these creeks later into the year and help us be more resilient in drought. The ponds and reservoirs that we've built or repaired or enhanced are filling up. For water security, there's a lot of conversations now about storing water during these sort of atmospheric river events to help us survive drought. And so all of the work that we've been doing with our Water for Farms, Fish, and People program, I think is paying off in this event. And then the other thing is that all the projects that we've done to install wood in certain places and creeks provided refugia for fish so that they didn't get blown out of the system or other wildlife. It provided them. These are habitat features that help protect wildlife in high storm events, but also help create pools and the conditions to help that wildlife. This is the other basic insight, is I'm calling this climate whiplash. We've been saying for a long time, so the RCD has been working on, and a number of partners have been working on drought, fire, and storms all at the same time. But in this case, staff was literally working on projects and approaches to all three of these things in the same week. And that's it. This is our new reality right now, is that we have to be planning for all of these things and working on all of these things at the same time. And sometimes when you're in drought for a few years, people get a little bit of memory loss about the potential impact of storms or flooding, or when you've got a lot of water, people aren't planning for drought. But I think now that these extreme events that are such polar opposites are happening so close together, there's a deeper understanding of the need to be moving forward on resilience on all fronts. Then, of course, there's the longer term solutions that the RCD and partners are working on. The continued water storage, all of the reservoirs and ponds and water storage and groundwater recharge efforts that we're doing throughout the district. There's all the floodplain restoration projects that we've been moving forward, continuing with all of the soil health work and the carbon farming and carbon farm planning. A challenge is that we need to continue to pursue and advocate for is integrated projects with co-equal benefits. It can be very difficult to fund or permit projects that have a number of different benefits. It's almost as though sometimes that if a project has benefits that are not habitat restoration, they're suspect, and it can be harder to get sort of habitat restoration funding or support for it. And I think that we need to continue to have conversations about, we all know on some level that projects that are integrated and holistic with multiple benefits are beneficial, but the way that we permit and fund those projects doesn't recognize how beneficial that is. And then the other thing is that we've been talking with the county for years about wanting to create a more long-term program to be able to provide technical assistance for people regarding wood in creeks, so that people don't proactively remove wood from creeks when in fact doesn't pose a risk, so that we can have permits in place and contractors lined up and that sort of thing, so that we're not in an emergency situation. Oh, well, it will be an emergency situation, but that we're ready to roll when the emergency hits.